I've called this thought Remembrance of the Land. There are three thoughts in it, three very brief thoughts. Remembrance, the record we leave on the land, and the inspiration we take from it. Of course, when we think of remembrance, at this time particularly, we think of 2 world wars and the terrible slaughter in each of them. But those of you who've been to the war cemeteries, in France especially, will have felt the enormity of those vast fields of thousands of graves in the fields of Picardy. I remember visiting such a cemetery of Border Regiment graves 27 years ago, when we visited Sarah, who was teaching at a school in Picardy. On one grave, a Cumbrian lad killed in the First World War. There was a fresh bunch of flowers left by an old lady and a card that said, "I loved you then and I love you now." That was 68 years after he was killed. And those vast acres of land devoted to war graves still bear their burden of love and loss. We all came from the land and returned to it. And those of you who watched Hamlet at Regged last Sunday, or a fortnight ago, may remember his lamenting, "What a piece of work is a man, how noble in reason, how infinite in faculty." Then after rehearsing his many other qualities, he says, "And yet to me, what is this quintessence of dust?" Well, I brought a prop with me today. Many years ago, a Tibet art student, Jean Lund, Ted and Pat's daughter, did a sketch of the landscape we see from this window. I was reacting perhaps to the prevailing preoccupation with pretty landscape, as opposed to searching for the deeper meanings in the land we see. On the sketch, I marked out features that recorded actions of people, their folly, their aggression, their selfishness and their care. The Roman road over Laupsful, the Motte Bailey Castle at Tibet, the railway, the field enclosures, the farmsteads, houses and intakes. All of these were expressions of conquest, of dominance, of enterprise and of husbandry that remain as a judgment of our purposes. Along with the other surface actions is the farming that dominates the landscape, where farmers over several millennia have fed their families, sustained their communities, and sought to make improvements to their lives. The visual result of their husbandry has been described as man's most moral work of art. It follows the farmer's exhortation, "Farm as though you will farm forever, and live as though you will die tomorrow." In our time, following the influence of the Romantic poets and the advent of leisure time and transport, we've seen recreation, on hill land especially, come into its own. It has enriched the lives of many who seldom saw the countryside and provided them with physical recreation. What did they find on the earth's surface? At the very least, they found peace and communion with nature. But for many, and potentially for all, they found what John Steinbeck called the glory. But Wordsworth put it best in his description of a shepherd boy, who was in fact himself, seeing through the mix of hillside, sea, weather, and everything else into the essence of it. Here's the quote: "Such was the boy, but for the growing youth, what soul was his, when from the top of some bold mountain he beheld the sun rise up and bathe the world in light. He looked, ocean and earth, The solid frame of earth and ocean's liquid mass in gladness lay beneath him. Far and wide the clouds were touched, and in their silent faces could he read unutterable love.